I never imagined the moment I found out would come from a screen, a viral video that tore through Cedar Creek like wildfire, right days before my wedding. There I was, staring at the glow of my phone in the dim light of my living room, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding louder than the distant hum of the street outside. The laughter I'd expected to hear from Chloe's side of the house was gone. All that was left was the echo of betrayal. Before that night, life felt solid, like the steady rhythm of a song I'd known all my life. I grew up in Cedar Creek, a small town with big hearts but small secrets or so, I thought. My family was simple but close-knit. Mom's kitchen always smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon, Dad's old records spinning softly in the background. I worked construction, honest, steady work that kept my hands calloused and my mind focused. Chloe, she was the light in all of it. I remember how her smile used to fill the room like sunlight through cracked blinds. She wasn't perfect, no one is. But I believed in us. We'd met 3 years ago in the corner booth of that local coffee shop, the one with the cracked window pane and the faded open sign. I still remember the smell of roasted beans mingling with her perfume that day. From the way she nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, to the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, everything about her felt like home. Our engagement was simple. Just the two of us and a handful of close friends in a quiet backyard surrounded by string lights and the scent of honeysuckle. We talked about the future like it was a book we were writing together, the house we'd buy, the kids we might have someday, the lazy Sunday mornings still to come. Cedar Creek watched us with a kind of approving nod. We were the perfect couple, or so everyone said. The last week before the wedding, the town buzzed with excitement. The fall festival was coming and everyone was talking about the big day. I could hear the steady thrum of life through my bedroom window, kids running past on their bikes, the low murmur of neighbors setting up booths. It all felt like a slow dance, familiar and warm. But somewhere beneath the surface, things had started to shift. Chloe had grown distant, or maybe I was just too caught up in the whirlwind of wedding plans to notice. There were phone calls she'd take in another room, moments where she'd glance at her screen and smile in a way that didn't reach her eyes. I told myself it was stress, that planning a wedding was hard, that I was imagining things. We had a routine. I'd come home from work, tired but content. She'd be in the kitchen, humming softly, sometimes saving a bite of dinner for me. Those quiet evenings were our sanctuary. I could feel the weight of the world lift just by being next to her. The way she'd rest her hand on my arm, the soft warmth of her breath as she fell asleep beside me, it was simple, but it was everything. I never thought the ground beneath me would crack so suddenly, that all the familiar sounds and smells could turn into something foreign, that the woman I loved, the one I was supposed to marry, was hiding a secret that would shatter everything. It started small. The kind of things you tell yourself aren't important until they become impossible to ignore. One evening, about 10 days before the wedding, I noticed Chloe's phone buzzing in the kitchen. She quickly silenced it when I walked in. That in itself wasn't unusual, but what made me pause was the way her smile slipped, just for a second, like a crack in a mirror. The light in her eyes dimmed, and her fingers moved a little too fast when she slid the phone into her pocket. I told myself not to read into it. We'd been through busy weeks before. Wedding plans, work deadlines, family visits. Maybe it was just nerves. But then there were the nights she came home late, saying she had to stay late at the office or meet with Jason, her boss. Jason Miller. A man in his late 40s, polished, with that kind of confident charm that makes people listen when he talks. I'd met him a handful of times, always shaking his hand with a smile, nodding as he made a joke that only he seemed to think was funny. Nothing felt off about those meetings. Or so I thought. One night, I caught a glimpse of her texts when she left her phone unattended, just a glimpse, a flash of words. "Can't wait to see you tonight." And, "Be careful, they're watching." The kind of messages you don't expect to find between a fiancée and her boss. I shoved the worry aside, blaming exhaustion and my own paranoia. But that little seed of doubt had been planted. The worst part was the way she looked at me sometimes. Not with hatred, not with love, something in between. A hesitation, like a story she wasn't ready to tell. I asked once if everything was okay, if she was stressed, but she just smiled and kissed me softly. brushing it off with a quiet, "I'm fine." Still, the nights felt colder. The familiar smell of her shampoo, usually comforting, began to remind me of absence. Our bed, once warm with shared breaths, now felt like a space between strangers. The silence was louder. I started watching for more signs. A late message she'd delete too quickly, a call she'd step outside to take, the way her laugh sometimes sounded forced. I didn't want to believe any of it. I kept telling myself it was just the wedding jitters, the pressure of expectations, that Chloe loved me and wouldn't do anything to hurt us. But every time I looked at her, I felt the growing weight of a distance I couldn't explain, like walking on a thin glass floor that might shatter at any moment. One afternoon, I went by her office to drop off some papers she forgot. The building smelled like stale coffee and polished wood. I caught a glimpse of Jason standing too close to her in the hallway, their conversation low and private. Chloe's hand lingered on his arm longer than I expected. They laughed quietly, sharing a joke that left her smiling but not looking at me. I forced a smile when she saw me. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Caleb," she replied, voice light but eyes flickering away. Jason nodded, offering a polite but distant handshake. I left feeling like an outsider in my own story. The moments piled up too many to ignore, too subtle to confront without proof. I wanted to trust her, to believe the woman I was going to marry. But the silence between us was growing louder, filled with unspoken things and half-truths. I didn't know then how close I was to the edge. It hit me on a morning I wasn't prepared for it. I was scrolling through social media, just a habit, a way to fill quiet moments before the day fully began. Then I saw it. A video, shared hundreds of times, from someone in town at the cafe where Chloe often met Jason. It was grainy, but clear enough. There they were, Chloe and Jason. Not just talking, not just smiling, but kissing. Like they were hiding nothing, like they thought the world was theirs alone. And Jason's hand resting on her waist, pulling her closer. My stomach dropped, my hands went numb. I could hear the pounding in my ears, the cold rush spreading through me. I stared at the screen, disbelief clawing at me. I wanted to look away, to tell myself it was some mistake, some cruel joke. But the video didn't lie. I called Chloe immediately. The phone rang and rang, her voicemail picking up each time. When she finally answered, her voice was different, quieter, guarded. "Caleb, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak at first. The words caught in my throat, thick with pain. I saw it, Chloe. The video. You and Jason." There was silence, then a trembling breath. "It's not what you think," she whispered. But I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. I drove over to her place, heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. When I arrived, the front door was unlocked. I stepped inside and found her sitting on the couch, face pale, eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she said simply, as if that one sentence could undo everything. "How long?" My voice was barely a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" Her silence was a wound. "A few months," she finally said, tears falling freely now. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop." Betrayal isn't just a word in that moment. It's a physical weight, pressing down, crushing hope and trust beneath it. I felt like the ground beneath me had given way, leaving me free-falling. "What about the wedding? The life we planned?" I asked, voice breaking. "Was any of it real?" She looked away, unable to answer. The more I learned, the darker the truth became. Jason was married something she'd hidden from me. He was her boss, yes, but also a man who'd used his power to manipulate her. Their affair wasn't a reckless mistake. It was a long-term betrayal. And the town? Cedar Creek, with its polite smiles and quiet streets, suddenly felt suffocating. Because when news leaked, and it always does in small towns, it didn't just stop with Chloe. My former friends, Brad, Ryan, and Kevin, started whispering, turning on me. They wanted to protect their own reputations, and, for them, I became the problem. Brad, with his easy grin and streetwise swagger, spun stories about me, about my supposed jealousy and instability. Ryan, who'd once been my closest friend, stopped returning calls. Kevin's icy glances cut deeper than any word. I wasn't just losing Chloe. I was losing the world I'd known, but something inside me refused to break. The day I called off the wedding was the day everything changed. Standing in front of Chloe's house, the cool morning air felt sharp against my skin, like reality had finally sliced through the fog of denial I'd been living in. I told her it was over, not with anger, but with a quiet finality. No shouting, no desperate pleas, just the end. She didn't fight me. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to save. That night, I sat alone in the dim light of my apartment, the hum of the city muted outside my window. I felt hollow, a shell moving through shadows. But beneath the ache was something else, a flicker of resolve. I wasn't going to be the victim. The people around me were turning their backs, twisting the truth to protect themselves. But I'd learned enough to know there was more beneath the surface. Chloe's betrayal was only the tip of the iceberg. My friend Jake, the bartender at the Rusty Nail, was one of the few who still believed in me. Jake wasn't just someone who poured drinks. He had an instinct for reading people, for sensing what others tried to hide. Over late-night talks with him, I began piecing things together. "Brad's been up to something," Jake said one night, wiping a glass with a rag. "Saw some shady stuff go down behind the hardware store. Heard whispers about drugs." I didn't want to believe it at first. Brad? The guy who'd been like a brother? But doubt was a poison that made you open your eyes. Then there was Ryan. I remembered the way he'd avoided me at the gas station last week. The way his phone always seemed glued to his hand. Jake nudged me again. "Word is, he's got a secret of his own, something messy." Kevin, the quiet one, was the hardest to read. But Jake's information was clear. Embezzlement from the community fund, money missing, accounts manipulated. I felt the pieces fall into place, a tangled web of lies and selfishness woven tightly around me. I needed proof, not just rumors or whispers, something solid. That's when I called Marcus. Marcus was a private investigator with a reputation for uncovering the truth no one wanted found. I'd met him briefly years ago at a family event. He wasn't flashy, wore faded jeans and a weathered leather jacket, but his eyes missed nothing. "Caleb," he said over the phone, voice steady. "If you want the truth, I can find it. But be ready for what you might uncover." I was. For the next 2 weeks, Marcus and I worked quietly. We followed Brad's deliveries, tracing small packages and late-night meetings. We tracked Ryan's movements, uncovering secret rendezvous and phone calls to someone he shouldn't be contacting. We dug into Kevin's financial records, unearthing transactions that didn't add up. Every revelation was a punch to the gut, but it was also fuel. I wasn't just fighting to clear my name, I was fighting for justice. For myself, and for the people who deserve to know the truth. At the Rusty Nail, Jake kept me grounded. His steady presence was a reminder that I wasn't alone. He'd seen the darkness that small towns hide beneath their charming facades. "We'll get there, Caleb," he said one night, handing me a glass of water. "One step at a time." And so, I planned. Not out of spite, not for revenge in the way the town might expect, but to shine a light on the shadows. To hold the ones who betrayed me accountable. The Fall Festival was the heart of Cedar Creek's year, an event where the entire town came alive with laughter, music, and the smell of caramel apples and burnt popcorn. This year, it would be different. For the first time, I wasn't just a face in the crowd. I was standing in the spotlight. The festival grounds were buzzing when I arrived. Golden light spilling over booths decorated with autumn leaves. Families wandered through, kids clutching cotton candy, and old friends greeted each other with warm embraces. The usual small-town charm wrapped around everything, but beneath it all, I felt the weight of eyes watching me, curious, suspicious, waiting. When my name was called to the stage, my heart pounded. The mic felt heavy in my hand, but my voice was steady. I looked out over the crowd, searching for familiar faces, some hopeful, some hostile. "This town," I began, "has been my home all my life. I believed in the people here. I believed in love, in loyalty." I paused, letting the silence grow thick. But sometimes, those things aren't what they seem. I spoke plainly, naming names with care but honesty. Brad's drug dealing, how he'd risked everything to keep up a facade. Ryan's affair that shattered trust in more ways than one. Kevin's embezzlement. The betrayal of the community's goodwill. I showed the proof Marcus had uncovered: photographs, transaction records, recorded conversations. The crowd murmured, disbelief and shock rippling through them like a wave. I didn't gloat or shout. I simply laid out the truth. Then I spoke of Chloe and Jason, the secret affair that broke my heart and nearly broke me. I spoke of betrayal, not to punish, but to expose the lies we live with when we choose silence over honesty. The atmosphere shifted as the truth settled in. Some turned away, unable to face it. Others nodded slowly, the weight of recognition heavy in their eyes. Then came the confrontation. Brad, Ryan, and Kevin appeared at the edge of the stage, their faces tight with anger and shame. Words were exchanged, quiet threats and bitter accusations, but I stood my ground. When Brad lunged, fists flying, I didn't back down. I defended myself with calm precision, not out of hatred but self-preservation. The fight was brief, the crowd gasping and shouting, but it ended with me standing firm, bruised but unbroken. The town watched as the hypocrisy was laid bare, not with cruelty, but with dignity and truth. By the end of the night, things had changed. The whispers in the streets turned to conversations about accountability. The people who had turned their backs now faced the mirror. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The days after, the festival felt surreal. Cedar Creek was quieter somehow, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. I walked the familiar streets with a new weight on my shoulders, not one of shame or bitterness, but of something like clarity. I didn't expect forgiveness, nor did I want it immediately. What I needed was time to rebuild the life I thought was lost, brick by brick, moment by moment. Jake was still there, a steady presence. We spent evenings at the Rusty Nail, not just sharing drinks, but stories about what had been lost, and what might still be found. He reminded me that healing wasn't a straight path, but a winding one. I started waking up without that heavy ache in my chest. Morning smelled like fresh coffee again, not like regret. I began fixing up my small apartment, hanging new pictures, clearing the clutter of the past. One afternoon, I took a walk by the river that runs through town. The water was calm, reflecting the pale blue sky and the fiery colors of fall leaves. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the fight, the faces in the crowd. But I also thought about the future. I realized that healing meant more than moving on. It meant learning to trust myself again, to listen to the quiet voice inside that says, "You are enough. You deserve better." I didn't close the door on love. Not yet. But I closed the door on lies, on false promises, on people who chose selfishness over honesty. And in that space, I found peace. I know now that life isn't about the moments we fall. It's about how we rise, how we reclaim our story, even when the pages are stained with pain. Cedar Creek hasn't forgotten what happened. Neither have I. But what matters is that I refuse to be broken by it. I stood up, spoke out, and in doing so, I took back control of my life. That's the hardest part, to choose courage when all you want is to hide. But it's also the most freeing. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought not in grand arenas, but in the quiet corners of our lives. When trust is shattered and the people we counted on turn away, it's tempting to let anger consume us, or worse, to let the pain define us. But what if the real strength lies in standing tall despite it all? In facing the truth, no matter how ugly, and choosing dignity over revenge. I shared my story not for sympathy, but as a reminder. Betrayal can come from the ones closest to us, and sometimes the people we call friends will surprise us in the worst ways. Yet, even in those moments of darkness, there is a path forward, a way to reclaim yourself, piece by piece, breath by breath. So I ask you, if you were in my shoes, faced with the same heartbreak and deceit, would you have found the courage to rise? Would you have done the same?